welcome to Procurement Pivots, the podcast for procurement professionals wanting to navigate change successfully and create career success on your own terms. I'm Donna Bowden, procurement career coach and founder of Narrate Your Career.
And I'm Laura Sellers, executive coach for procurement and founder of Coaching for Procurement. And between us, we bring almost 25 years of supporting and working with procurement professionals. And it's fair to say we've navigated many of our own career pivots along the way. And now we're here to help you do the same.
Each episode will share practical strategies, honest conversations, and expert insights to help you confidently tackle the changes and challenges in your procurement career.
Let's get started.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Procurement Pivots podcast. Hey, Donna.
Hello, how are you today?
Really good, thank you. Everyone, we're still in the middle of this quite nice heat wave in the UK at the moment, so it all feels very nice and summery. And what better time of year to talk about, to think about, to reflect about where your career is right now and what you would like to get out of it, than to think about the successful leadership of stakeholder relationships in your procurement role.
Quite surprised, actually. It's taken us until like more than 50 episodes to kind of have a whole episode on this. I know we've spoken about it in other episodes, haven't we? But yeah, when we were thinking about topics, I think, oh, we've not done one yet on stakeholder relationships.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because stakeholders, I think, is a word that probably has shown up in practically every episode of Procurement Pivots, and we're well over a year into doing weekly episodes. So, but it's an interesting one because it's such a broad term as well, isn't it? I think, and it can massively impact career success, career happiness, leadership, presence. So, yeah, we're going to take a look at how we can give some control back, some empowerment to our listeners when it comes to how to navigate and how to lead from the front with these stakeholder relationships.
Yeah, and I was sharing with you when we were kind of talking about kind of the episode, like when I look back to my recruitment days, actually, when I was hiring into senior procurement leadership roles, like often one of the first questions that businesses would ask me when I was introducing candidates to them would be, okay, yeah, great, their experience looks good on paper, but what are they going to be like if I put this person in front of our most senior, most difficult, most challenging stakeholders? And even when you look at like interview questions, competency interview questions, the most common competency interview question in procurement leadership is, tell me about a time where you've won over challenging, difficult stakeholders. And so I just think this is such an important part, an expected part of being a procurement professional. So yeah, I think this is lots to explore, I think, today.
Yeah, and I think as well, like from a leadership lens, is that stakeholders do come up, relationships with stakeholders come up all the time in coaching conversations, in team workshops, because they can make us feel like we're doing really well or actually like we're not doing very well at all. So yeah, I think while we can look at this from lots of different perspectives, we're going to try and just give some really key points on where we've seen success through our clients of what when they focused on these particular things, they have done really well out of it. They've built really good relationships and have felt a real sense of career happiness and success. So.
And can we just acknowledge, so, you know, when we're talking about stakeholders, I think, like, you know, from working with procurement for 12, 13 years now, I think, you know, it's very, very rare to see a scenario where someone doesn't have at least one stakeholder that they find maybe more challenging to develop the right type of relationship with. And I think, like, it's really important to acknowledge that this is part and parcel of the role. And, you know, actually, it's quite normal and quite common to have at least a small number of your stakeholders, as, you know, maybe initially, you know, being more difficult relationships to kind of build and to win over. And, you know, actually, it's quite unusual to have a profession that's then facing off to people that are often hierarchically so much more senior. Like, actually, you know, the majority of procurement professionals, their stakeholders often are sometimes levels, multiple levels above the level that they're operating at structurally within the organization. So this isn't just like, okay, I've got some more difficult relationships. Often it's like, I've got some, more difficult relationships to navigate with individuals that actually have a lot more power in the organization, individuals that, structurally, sometimes might be on the board versus a procurement professional that's not sat on the board. So I think it does add an additional kind of layer of complexity when it comes to building and navigating those relationships, because actually that can feel really difficult from a confidence level perspective if you're having to face off to someone that is really resisting that relationship being built in the way that you want it to be built, but actually you're kind of thinking, yeah, but you're much more senior than me. I think that's quite a difficult spot to be in sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not overlooking the complexity in these things. And this is a thing, like wherever you go in your career, whether you stay within the organization and move departments, or if you move companies, you will come across stakeholders, you will come across challenging stakeholders, you'll come across great champions in your stakeholders. So yeah, where would we start then with this first foray into this then in terms of the key actions?
Interesting. I mean, I think if we're saying where do we start, maybe let's start with first impressions, because, obviously people listening in right now, some people are in roles, some people are about to step into new roles. So we know that, some of you might be listening in thinking about some of your current relationships you've got with stakeholders. Some of you might be thinking about approaching the development of brand new relationships with new stakeholders. So I know this is something that we kind of talk about quite a lot, but how is it I'm showing up? I think I would like to kind of spotlight just really being quite intentional with the first impression and then the continued impressions with that person, and just rather than just rocking up to that first interaction and that first meeting without kind of thought around, okay, what is it I want them to know about me? What is it I want them to do? How is it I want them to feel? Like actually just thinking intentionally about how you kind of approach that interaction. And also, this is something that, I support my clients with often, particularly when they're stepping into new leadership roles. Often the first impression, it happens before you're in the room with that person. Nowadays, if your name has popped up and you've been introduced as this new procurement person, or if you're suddenly stepping into a project and you're meeting stakeholders for the first time, often those individuals, the first thing they do is they go and check you out on somewhere like LinkedIn or the intranet page, or they might start asking questions. Do you know who this person is? And so, sometimes the first impression isn't the first contact that you've had with that person, or the first meeting, or the first call. It might actually happen before that. And so this is where I think, like, often your personal brand can really work for you or work against you. It's like, actually, if that stakeholder's first experience of you is before they meet you, and it's, say, looking at your LinkedIn profile to get a suss of who you are and what you're about, is it saying what you would want a senior stakeholder to say? And if not, perhaps you need to think about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, first impressions and the personal branding, like you say, I think we all move into a room, don't we? Like if we've seen names, like who are we going to be building a relationship with? Who are we going to be speaking with? And we will carry an impression in ourselves of that person and vice versa. So I think it's always valuable to have in mind what it is you're going in there with, and to try and keep an open mind too, because any bias or perception that we already have is going to put some barriers up. If we were looking at this from a cynical point of view, but look from more positively, having an open mind about what's possible in this relationship with this person. And I think as well, there's room here in this same point around the first impressions of deciding how you're going to show up with these people. Right.
Yeah.
So owning this relationship confidently, because the confidence you bring into that room about the relationship you want to build with them, that will help to build trust with them. Whereas if you go in thinking, oh, this might be tricky, or, whatever perception you have, that could also dictate the direction of the relationship. So yeah, own it confidently, move in there thinking, how am I going to show up for this stakeholder?
Yeah.
And what do I need from them?
Yeah. And we explored this much further on our episode about the tell me about yourself question. I think really like kind of understanding what your own introduction is going to be, that can be really powerful, actually. That first kind of 60 seconds of introducing yourself to that person, it's like, what version of your introduction are you going to use that's going to help to build the trust and demonstrate that credibility from very, very early on.
Yeah, brilliant point. I think something else as well, like which probably flows on nicely from that key point that we've talked about, is also around prioritizing stakeholders. Because if you are new to role, or if you are new to the business, or even if you feel like you're doing a reset after a restructure or something, it's when we think about stakeholders, we feel like we need to get everybody on board. And I think that some of those relationships will come with time. Others you will need to build quicker, depending on what projects you've got going on and what the business priorities are. So I definitely think it's a way of relieving pressure off you as well, to sit there and go, right, who do I need to focus on first? Or which top 5, which top 3 people do I need to focus on? And map that against the business needs and the live projects, because I'm all for building gradually with things. And I think sometimes we go in, especially if you're new to role, we've talked about this in a previous episode, I just can't remember which one, but around how when you are new to role, you probably get wheeled out to all the stakeholders that you want to build that relationship straight away. But that is very time consuming, and you also want to get quick wins. So don't be afraid to prioritize which ones you're going to focus on first. That doesn't mean you're ignoring the rest. You can still do a nice quick intro, but you need to be able to think, right, where am I going to focus my efforts first?
And I think it's kind of linked potentially, but I think, sometimes you can use others to facilitate those introductions. So really working out like, who are your internal allies or your sponsors, and where could you leverage one relationship to open up another? Because actually, that can be so powerful. So it could be that you're already working really well with certain senior stakeholders, and it could be then that you kind of see, look, this is working really well. I'm looking to kind of replicate this type of relationship elsewhere. Like, who in your network could you kind of introduce me to? So it could be that you could kind of leverage your really positive stakeholder relationships, but also sometimes I think it's, where could you lean into your boss, for instance, or your boss's boss? It's sometimes like just having an introduction to those people can really like help to kind of facilitate the start of a new relationship. So it doesn't always have to be on your shoulders, but I think it's also, even if that other person doesn't make the introduction, like leaning into where you do have a relationship. So, asking your boss, like going back to that prioritization point, from your perspective, I've got this list of 25 stakeholders. Where do you think I need to start? And then you could actually reference that other person, or even with, even with the stakeholders, because they're going to have their peer group, they're probably going to be sat on leadership teams, etc. Where do you think I should go next? Who do you think I should speak to? And then it's kind of name dropping. I've been working with so-and-so. They thought it might be helpful for me to kind of reach out to you as well. So I think, again, that can often go quite a long way.
Yeah, I really like that, because I had this conversation with a one-to-one client actually last week around, sometimes you feel like you have to do all this on your own. If you are an independent person, or you're, in this person's case, quite introverted, like you think, well, I have to do all this on my own. But actually, like you say, leveraging the good currency you already have with others and saying, look, how can they help me? There's no shame in that. And it doesn't mean that you're not good at building a relationship. You need to be able to think, right, how can I get some help to build this relationship that's really important to me?
Definitely. Where next then, Laura?
I mean, I know we've covered this on a recent episode around communication styles, but for me, it's just such a quick win to recognize, to know your own communication style, but also to recognize that of your stakeholder as well. Because if you can immediately identify that you are of opposite communication types, then you know you've got some work to do to adapt. And once you know and recognize that, you actually save yourself a lot of trouble and a headache, really, up front. So, example being, if you are a detailed person, you like to offer the detail of a process, but the stakeholder sitting in front of you, like you referred to earlier, might be a lot more senior than you. They may just want to know the headlines. Yeah. It's really important to recognize that, because A, you don't take it personally once you see what their natural style is, and B, you can tweak that and try and get on the right side of them straight away and say, look, I obviously have more information about this, but assume you just need the headlines, boom, boom, boom. Yeah. You know, I think it's such a quick win to be able to do if you know your communication style and you recognize ones of others.
Yeah. And I think as well, like, again, it is linked to communication, but I think, you know, often those first interactions, they're really important, aren't they? That's going to help shape, like, how is this relationship? What direction is it going in? But I think, like, you know, also asking some really good open questions and getting that person to kind of really open up and talk to you and share, like, give them the space to share, you know, the good, the bad, the ugly, and then really listen to what it is they're saying and acknowledge what it is they're saying. And, you know, I think sometimes, you know, again, because life is really busy and often that stakeholder introduction, it might be, you know, wedged in between multiple other meetings that day. And, you know, I think sometimes it's kind of, you know, it's like rush into one conversation, rush into another conversation. But I think actually just giving that person the space to share, and also like asking questions around, like, you know, how do we develop this relationship positively together? You know, actually, what are the areas that you would actually like some help and support with initially? Like, where can I support you right now? Not always kind of, you know, I think sometimes you might know that at some point you're going to need to address some quite big pertinent areas in their area of the business, which, you know, may be harder to kind of to get their buy-in. And so it's actually understanding, like, where could the quick wins be in the relationship? Where can you help them out? Where are they having some annoying challenges that you might be able to support them quite quickly to help to build that relationship positively?
Yeah, I really like that. And that thing around understanding what's important to them, you know, it's so critical to see where your stakeholder is at, because it's so easy to take things personally, right? If they're being a bit defensive, or if they're not wanting to let procurement in, or they're letting you in last minute when they need your help. But to think about what's going on in their world and where can I help, I think is really, really valuable. I think, to borrow a term as well from the coaching world, although it's obviously a very well-known term in procurement, but in a different way, like to do some contracting is what I would call it in the work that I do. Is around, you know, how do we want this relationship to be? How do you like relationships to work? How do you like to communicate with each other? What are we going to do if things go wrong? How are we going to address it? Because if you do all this up front, it might sound quite, oh, well, how would I do that in 30 minutes? It might be something that happens later on, but have those things in mind, understanding what success looks like for both of you in this relationship will definitely it'll save you a lot of work up front, because if things do go wrong or something happens, it's like, right, we said we would sort this out and let's do a face-to-face. Or let's make sure we meet up quarterly, anything like that. But to actually just name it at the beginning would actually goes a long way.
Yeah. And I think, you know, trust is obviously key, but trust builds over time. And so I think as well, just being really conscious of what it is you're saying you're going to do, what it is you're maybe promising, and acting and delivering within the parameters that you've kind of specified. It's yeah, I think you can build this relationship on trust over time, but sometimes, like, one or two things, small things that you don't do, can really quickly unravel all of that good work that you've done. So I think it's like, you know, we see it a lot, don't we? People kind of over promising, under delivering. Like, be very careful about what it is you're saying you're going to do. And, you know, I think sometimes there is this like, it's like people pleasing kind of tendency with the stakeholders to win them over. Oh, yeah, we can do that. I can do that. Actually, you might be able to do it right now, but what about when you're really busy? You know, what about when all the stakeholders have started to kind of, you know, share requirements and want your involvement? Are you still going to be able to do those things that you're saying you can do when your workload has increased? And it ultimately, most people will find, particularly stepping into new roles, the workload, all of a sudden, it very quickly kind of, you know, escalates in a way, because all of that good stuff you've been doing to win over the hearts and minds of the stakeholders, suddenly they're listening, they're going, actually, yeah, I do want your help, I do want your help, do want your help. And suddenly it's like a very different proposition. So I think just being very careful about what it is you're stating you can do, and making sure you do it. And if you can't do it, or you're not going to do it, communicating it well with them so that they're not feeling let down.
Yeah, to be clear is to be kind, as we say. But I think this is the other point I'd like to make to add on to that, and they're great points, just around that honesty and that clarity in relationships, because it's so easy to lose that in the remote working world. But also, when we hear about challenging stakeholder relationships, or even when you want to maximize and leverage great stakeholder relationships, you know, communication is at the heart of that. So we've mentioned communication styles earlier on, fair enough, but like this is around when something you feel is building up, some tension is building up, or something you think, oh, you know, I won't say anything now, it's not worth it. These things do build up and eventually end up in maybe a little thing that being the final straw that breaks the camel's back. Here we go. Laura's put a metaphor in. But I think I just see it happen so often. Like it's normally a tiny thing that ends up being the final straw. So to be able to have those honest conversations all the way through, and this builds on from the contracting point, is, okay, look, something's not quite working right with this process. Let's talk about it. Let's get it in a room and thrash it out. You know, it's so important. And I think honesty, people like to avoid having those difficult conversations, but to be able to do that, I think, is great leadership, quite frankly.
Yeah. And I think, like, again, this is something that you've certainly said a few times, but you're not starting from scratch with this. And actually, you know, the likelihood is you have won over other challenging stakeholders and relationships in the past. So I think also understanding for yourself, like, you know, every relationship is going to be different, but I guess like actually recognizing what is it you've done previously that's helped you to build some of those relationships. So, you know, I've kind of worked through some of this recently with a particular client, and actually what she recognized was, you know, in some instances it was actually her sense of humor that enabled her to kind of almost build some common ground with some of those individuals that historically others had found it really difficult to build relationships with. And so I think it's like also like leaning into yourself, like who you are. And, you know, it's kind of like there will be different ways to build that relationship, and kind of understanding, like, you know, actually, is there a pattern to what's worked for you previously? That doesn't mean it's always going to work with every single person, but at least like identifying, you know, where is it that I've had to build those relationships, and what was it about what I did that potentially was, you know, was the thing to turn it around.
Yeah, no, I really like that point. I think, like I say, to turn it around, like things can be turned around.
Totally.
You know, like sometimes you might feel like we're never going to get to a good point here, but you know, we've seen it in our clients' work, right? We've seen that they're able to do it if they are proactive in doing that as well.
Yeah. And sometimes those really challenging relationships at the beginning, like I've seen it with so many people, sometimes they go on to become the best working relationships, and almost like it's this kind of source of entertainment for both parties. Like, wow, look at where we've come from, and now look at how we work together. And I think it's a bit like, you know, in life in general, sometimes the most challenging moments in our life are what give us the greatest opportunity for learning. But the other side of that is like something, you know, something really quite special. And yeah, I can think of a lot of clients that, you know, when they're sharing kind of, you know, their examples of winning over more challenging individuals, like actually the exit point with that relationship, if there is an exit point, is like it's miles away. It's like, you know, fragmented, difficult, challenging relationships. Like, do you know what? You know, in the end, I was almost like part of their function, and you know, it's kind of yeah, just huge turnarounds and amazing results then delivered together with that individual. So, and I think this is another point actually that I wanted to talk about today, because coming back to my earlier point, you know, one of the most common questions that comes up when businesses are looking to hire into senior procurement roles, it is around like, is this someone that we can put successfully in front of our more challenging stakeholders? Businesses aren't worried about putting you in front of the, you know, the champions, the individuals that are going to welcome you with open arms from the beginning. But what they are thinking about is, okay, can I put you in front of that CFO that is more skeptical? Can I put you in front of, you know, whoever it is? It doesn't matter what their position is, but they're always imagining the more challenging individuals, the more resistant, the more skeptical individuals. And they're thinking like, are you going to be the person that can, you know, still develop a relationship there? And I think like, being able to recognize where you've done it before, like I've just said, but being able to share it and articulate it well, that can help you to build further relationships. Yeah, from a recruitment perspective, you know, I am a big believer in like, know your stories, know your examples. And, you know, if we know that the most common question in interviews at senior level is, can you tell me about a time where you've won over a really challenging stakeholder? Like, make sure you've got some really good examples, but it's not just about using it to secure another role. It's like, actually, how can you use storytelling to evidence, actually, like, look, this is where we could get to if we can move forward from where we are right now. And if we can work together better, like, these are some of the results in their language, not your language. These are some of the results that we could experience by working together well. And I think it's like using the evidence, anecdotal evidence and stories from elsewhere in the business, and like, you know, cherry picking, like, you know, what are those like impact stories you've got of, you know, working really well to the benefit of that stakeholder? Like, you know, how can you use some of that to kind of help you to build the credibility, the trust, the belief?
Yeah, all great points. And this is the influence principle of social proof and authority as well. So there's so much like gold in there from what you've said.
Yeah.
I think, you know, and I know I'm always interested in layering and about building gradually, because like you say, trust isn't built overnight, right? And sometimes you can feel so daunted, like you're pushing water up a hill. It's just like I think it's so important to create small milestones when it comes to stakeholder relationships, because I work with a corporate client with a whole team, and they have some really, really challenging, high profile stakeholders in their business, and they're external to their organization. And they've got a really challenging relationship, but we've sort of done a little bit of mapping around, well, how far have we come? Because actually this time last year we didn't have this and we didn't have that. And you've got to have that to keep you going, to build your resilience. So I think to keep doing these small milestones, well, if we're going to get them fully on board by next year, what's the milestone that's halfway on the way to that? You know, and I think, you know, bringing in the coaching insight here, that's how we achieve these things, is that we work on goals and consistency.
Yeah. And I think as well, it's like almost like, for me, it's like, sometimes what are the other touch points with that stakeholder? You know, so sometimes, again, you know, coming back to LinkedIn, certainly, you know, some of the clients I'm supporting at the moment, they've stepped into the roles and they're not sat in a building, in an office with those stakeholders day to day. You know, sometimes they're not even in the same continent, you know, and so actually, keeping an eye on what's going on for those individuals publicly, socially, LinkedIn, and their team members. Like, it's finding like where's the common ground, or where is the positive conversation, maybe away from just this project, or developing the relationship. But people are they're sharing personal stuff, they're sharing promotions, team promotions, projects, they're sharing the fact they've just got married, just had a baby. Like, actually, are you taking the time to kind of, I say research, but at least keep an eye on what's going on for those individuals, and actually how could you use that information that's being shared publicly to build the relationship further? And sometimes even just a one-liner like, oh, I saw your post the other day, congratulations. That's sometimes just those tiny actions that really don't take a lot of effort or a lot of time. They really do go a long way. Or it's like, they've mentioned they're going on holiday to wherever, actually following up a few weeks later. And it's like not necessarily always work related, but I was thinking of you the other day, how was your holiday? Like, just the human interaction, like that's what builds trust and, finds the common ground some of the time. And I know that's not necessarily going to work with every person, but it's actually thinking like outside of the formalized business meetings, what are the other small ways that I can keep building this relationship and keep nurturing this relationship?
Yeah, I really like that. And they're really, really tiny things. I love those little touches, the personal touches that you're talking about there to keep those relationships going. And I guess an opposite view to this as well is like we're talking about successful leadership of stakeholder relationships. And we know there are tricky stakeholders out there, like we've established. But what about the ones that we give a lot more thought and weight to that actually are not relevant to the work that you're doing? And I'm not talking about my career ghost that I talk about there. I've talked about that enough. But in terms of sometimes we put so much focus on stakeholders that don't matter to us in the project, or they don't have as much sway because it is complex, the environment that procurement often work in. So I sometimes wonder as well, if when we're doing the mapping, the prioritizing, the building of relationships, there will be some relationships that you just think, it's going to take a while for us to get there. We don't see eye to eye, but is this important to me in the moment right now? Because sometimes we get so wound up by the way that some stakeholders behave towards procurement, particularly around perceptions and stuff. But you don't have to convince everybody all the time. You need to, it's back to that prioritization, but just thinking around, am I giving more airtime to this person than I need to right now?
Yeah. And also, am I creating visibility of where those relationships are really benefiting as well? And I don't mean in a showy offy kind of way, in a bragging kind of way, but are they actually seeing the positive relationship and the benefit? That's the key bit, isn't it? Like the business benefit and business impact where it is going well. Like, because if they're not seeing that, and if they don't understand that, so I guess it is that kind of, I think it's a really valid point. Like, some people probably they're not necessarily the biggest priority to worry about right now. So I think it's like keeping check of that, like, and the why. I think everything just comes back to the why, doesn't it? Like, who's on that stakeholder map? Why? And actually, just because they are on there as an important person, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a now as well. So it's like, it's okay, they're important, but when are we going to approach that? Can we just before we finish up today, and I know this is something that has come up on certainly an episode that we did quite early on, but I think, and again, this is probably a whole different topic, the PR surrounding procurement. Like, procurement does have a PR issue as a function. I think most of us will acknowledge that. Like, it's, the messaging is inconsistent, the understanding is inconsistent, and it's, in places businesses really understand the value and they feel the benefit of procurement. In other places, it's not really understood. But but we've spoken about it before, but we're saying today, like, most procurement professionals are going to have challenging stakeholders. And so, actually, the memes that we see, the posts that we see, I'm coming back to this because I just think, like, there is this PR challenge and issue around procurement, but yet it's procurement itself that is kind of sharing all these, like, the eye rolling memes of, oh, the stakeholders come to us at the 11th hour again. I mean, it's constant. Like, I don't think a day goes by, and I don't sit on LinkedIn like for a lot of the day. I will be on it each day, but not for long periods of time. And even so, I'm generally always seeing like one of those like posts, which is not necessarily showing the stakeholder relationships with procurement in a positive way. So
No.
it's like, I guess I thought I'd bring it up, but what do we think about these really, and how is that helping to improve the understanding of procurement's added value?
Well, I won't repeat my rant on procurement means, but there is an episode very early on in our podcast journey where the ranting about procurement means does take place. It's a truth episode. But I think I absolutely agree with you. I mean, you've got to lead with this, right? You want to portray what you want to see from others, right? So we get it, like, not everybody respects procurement. The perceptions, the PR problem do exist, but to change that, it has to sit within procurement. It starts with the procurement. And so putting these memes about it, I mean, I just think it's a LinkedIn content creators easy posting thing because they tend to perform quite well in terms of the algorithm and they get lots of likes. But you just think about the ripple effect, like Donna says, like the wider impact of that. Because for me, if I was a stakeholder who saw that, I would dig my heels in even more if I saw that my procurement colleague was liking memes like that. So it's definitely a contentious issue, that one.
And I think coming back to full circle, you started off today by saying, where should we start? And we started with first impressions. And I think actually it's like, what is it you want your stakeholders to think and feel about you and your function? And then how can you show that? Like, if you want to have a voice on LinkedIn, and obviously, everyone's going to do what feels right for them. But I think it's like, what are the things you could talk about that's going to actually help those stakeholders to really understand kind of the benefits. So actually some really positive storytelling, could be really helpful. But it's, that's the thing. It's like, wow, if we know that your stakeholders that you haven't yet met, they're going to be checking you out on LinkedIn before they meet you. It's like, actually, that could be really like poor timing, couldn't it? If the stakeholder is checking you out at that moment that, that meme is going around. And I think, it's typically procurement that will be supporting those posts, but, we are all connected to stakeholders as well. And the more challenging stakeholders are going to also see that, and it just does not help.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have covered quite a lot of ground here with stakeholders. It's a complex topic, I definitely think like one step at a time does go well with this. But thank you so much for joining us on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
This episode.
Yes. Hopefully it's been helpful, and just, I think, like we always say, just kind of break it down. And I think just really like just take stock of your current relationships right now. And I think it's just really thinking about, like, what's one thing you could do differently, with one of your relationships to really improve and better that working relationship with that person. One small thing sometimes can make a really, really big difference, and a series of small things can make a massive, massive difference. So this is not about reinventing the wheel, but it's actually about just being a bit more intentional and saying, okay, like, if I was to take all of my relationships further just a notch, what does that look like?
Yeah, exactly. Just one step at a time. Absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so
Well,
much for
thank you for joining
everyone.
us. Oh, we said it exactly
Oh.
the same time there. We are in tune. So yeah, we will see you next time. Thanks everyone. Take
Take
care.
care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to Procurement Pivots. We hope today's episode gave you actionable tips to help you to continue to move forward in your procurement career.
If you enjoyed the conversation, follow our episodes, share them with others, and please support us on our social media channels for others that might be interested to tune in.